So just to wrap this up, we're going to talk about two economic sort of laws, rules, whatever you want to call it, that sort of together demonstrate that the best kind of trade is free trade. Now, that's not me saying that. That's economic liberalism saying that. You get to make your own call on this. The best kind of trade is free trade. And when we say free trade, we mean zero barriers, zero subsidies. Every time the government gets involved and puts a tariff or a subsidy in there, it makes the whole system less economically efficient. I'll let you take macroeconomics to find that out. For now, just take my word for it. And now, one of the things you guys just watched the thing on was the law of comparative advantage. Both nations gain from trade if each specializes in the thing it can produce relatively more efficiently. Now, before we talk about this, I do want to point out one thing, just the economic nationalism side of this. So in that video that you saw, and you had the man and the woman, they were picking bananas and catching fish. And what it essentially says is if the man only picks bananas, then he's going to be better off. And that's, again, if we're talking about economic efficiency, that's actually true. But let's imagine instead that the man is a country and the woman's a country, so two countries, and there are people in the country, sectors of the economy that are picking bananas, people in the economy that are catching fish. Same thing's going to be true about comparative advantage, is that both countries are better off if they just focus on the thing they do the best. The economic nationalists will then come in and say, all right, that's great, but those people who are catching fish in man country, whatever you want to call that guy, the people who are catching fish are now out of work. Well, they're not out of work. They have to go pick bananas. Well, what if they like fishing? Does that make sense? Like, what if there's a whole culture around it? Like, that's what the cotton farmers in the United States are going to say is, you want me to stop being a cotton farmer and go become a banker. So you want me to, I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's not just an economic shift. It's a cultural shift, a social shift. You can even say it's a political shift in the sense that South Carolina may become less, well off compared to states like New York. So there are a lot of things that go into that when we start talking about, it's not just a simple matter of I'll just pick a banana instead of catch a fish. There's a huge shifts of economy, culture, social, politics, all that kind of stuff when that happens. That being said, the argument is still economically, man, you're better off if you do this. Persons in those inefficient industries then move to more efficient industries. So what do those U.S. cotton farmers do? They'll end up becoming bankers or teachers. And then overall, the U.S. economy will be more efficient and productive. And technically, this U.S. cotton farmer should technically, again, maybe not this year or next year, but in 20 years, if they make that shift, they should be better off as well. Now, again, that works great on paper. It works great in an economics class. Try convincing a U.S. cotton farmer of that. That's a real tough thing to do. That being said, from an economic standpoint, that's, again, the best kind of free trade is free trade. And remember, when you're talking about economic liberalism, and we talk about liberalism as in general, there's a sense in which this is about national security. I can't even say it, national security as well. Because remember, when we talked about liberalism, is that if you want to get to perpetual peace, if two states are trading more with each other, again, free trade, more trade, if two states are trading more with each other, then the cost of war goes up. And the more free trade is out there, the more expensive war is, and the less likely war is going to be as well. So that's a national security argument as well for this. All right, now we're going to get into the weeds. So you ready for this? This is like graduate school stuff here. I'm so excited about this. I'm going to throw out a theorem here that you'll probably never ever use in your life, but it helps illustrate a significant point. But let's just talk about it here. It's called the Heckscher-Ohlin theorem. Ooh, this is good stuff. You walk into a party and say Heckscher-Ohlin theorem, man, you are going to get a lot of digits. So here's the idea behind it. Essentially, it says the state will export things. A state will export things that require intensive use of the state's relatively abundant factor. So let's talk about factors for a second. There are three factors. Do you know what those three factors are? Anybody know your business enough to know what the three factors are? They are land, labor, and capital. So this is like You can think money, people, and then land. So think about the United States. Now, again, every state has land, every state has people, every state has money. Every state has land, labor, and capital. The question is which do you have relatively abundant of? Again, next to each other. So, for example, the United States. We got a lot of land, we got a lot of people, but man, relative to other countries, we got a lot of capital. Capital is our relatively abundant factor. So what does the Heckscher-Ohlm theorem say about the United States? The United States will export things that require intensive use of capital. That makes sense. U.S. is going to export capital, meaning it's going to invest, foreign direct investment, so exporting capital itself, and goods dependent on capital, like sort of, again, first generation technologies. Fantastic. We're not going to export a lot of things that are manufacturing. We're going to export stuff that's dependent on capital, services, things like that. Now let's think about China. Which one of these is China have as a relatively abundant factor? Take a second, figure it out. If you said people, labor, you are correct. China exports labor-intensive goods, which is why a lot of the manufactured stuff you're going to see in Walmart comes from China. They have a lot of people. It would make sense that they would focus on things that require labor-intensive practices. That's all this is saying. Land is going to be agriculture. And it's not a big surprise that in many places in Africa, it's very much an agricultural thing. Not a lot of money. They do have a lot of people, but not compared to sort of the land that they have. And so agriculture is going to be sort of the thing there. All right. That doesn't mean it has to stay that way. It just means that that's sort of the way that it is right now. Now, you with me so far on this? Okay, so this is the Heckscher-Ohlm theorem. Now, here is the next part of this theorem. Are you ready for this? Okay. Without international barriers, the movable factors will flow globally. Ooh. So let's go back here. Let's take the United States, for example. If there's no barriers to the movement of capital, the U.S. is going to export capital as much as it really can. It's going to invest in other places. Makes sense. If there's no barriers to goods, then those things are going to be exported as much as possible. They're going to flow globally. But let's just think about these things here. It's not that the goods will flow globally. The labor is going to flow globally. So let me just give you an example here. Let's take the United States for just a second, all right? So here's the U.S. and here's Mexico. Okay, so Mexico, what do you think is their relatively abundant factor? Land, labor, or capital? Labor, people. And here's capital up here. Okay, so if I am a worker here, man, I can make a wage, but since there's fewer workers up here, I can make a better wage up here. So if nobody stops me, what's going to happen is labor is going to move across the border until it sort of evens out here, and you sort of get even. And capital is going to sort of move this way, which it does to invest in Mexican businesses and things like that. It's going to even out like that. Land doesn't move, so we're not even including land in this. It's not a movable factor. All right. So what's going to happen then is labor will flow to labor-scarce areas. We call that immigration. Makes sense. Capital is going to flow to capital-scarce areas. We call that foreign direct investment. So far, so good. Now, given that the United States and Europe tend to be capital abundant, and that the U.S. and Europe have way more political and economic power than other states, when the states come together, what are they going to do? Are they going to allow for a lot of movement of labor? The answer is no. They're going to have rules. There's going to be sort of rules about labor movement. Does the U.S. and the West want rules about capital movement? The answer is no, they do not. And that's what you end up with. No barriers on capital movement. Let's say I was a billionaire. I could, with a phone call, or maybe even online anymore, I can invest in Saudi Arabia, and in 2 seconds pull my investment out of Saudi Arabia and put my investment into China. pull my investment out of China and put it into Mexico, pull my investment out of Mexico and put it into another country. And I do that without any cost whatsoever. There's no barriers to trade. There's no tariffs on trade. There's no taxes on trade. There's no borders on capital like there are with labor. So labor can't move, capital can move freely, and it's not a big surprise that the US and the West like this and support that system. That being said, politics and economics and trade, they're all interrelated in this whole thing. So isn't free trade the best, the absolute best? And the answer is maybe. It depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about economic efficiency, free trade is super awesome. But if you're going to really save free trade, don't you need to save free trade of everything, including labor? If we start putting barriers up on labor, is it really free trade anymore? The answer is it doesn't really matter. Economic nationalism, internationalism, they all blend together in some ways like that. All right. Point is, you got a little assignment to do here. You're going to look at some stuff on the U.S.-China trade war and then the more recent sort of trade deal, which arguably, of course, happened before coronavirus. So who knows what's going to happen as a result of that. But you're going to do a little discussion on this, and I want to find out from you if either one of economic nationalism or economic liberalism sort of swayed you in terms of what is the best thing for the U.S. to do. And again, it kind of depends on what you think the point of trade is. All right, see you guys.